Hey there, welcome to episode 111 of the While We Were Working show. It is a show that helps you become a better people leader and stay on top of HR topics that you may not have been aware of. Why? Because you're so busy working. I'm your host, Joey Price, and I'm joined as always with our awesome co-host, Sommer, who's our consulting practice manager here at Jumpstart, and we've got a fascinating show today. We are going to talk about stay interviews and are they still relevant? And then another topic that we'll cover in our Consultants Corner, which is where we talk about HR life in the trenches, is how do teams with U.S. employees work well with those who may be hired, employed, and engaged in another country. So we're going to talk about cross-cultural communication here. And without further ado, let's get into it. So Sommer, you want to set us up with While We Were Working?
Of course, and welcome everybody to this week's show. We're so glad you're here, whether you're joining us with the video feed or just catching the audio. We're thrilled that you're here. The While We Were Working segment of our show is where Joey and I scour the internet, reading articles, blogs, other podcasts, consuming as much content as possible, looking to bring you a topic that's interesting, that you can learn from, that will inspire you. And, well, you might have missed it because you were so busy working, but that's okay. Your friends here at Jumpstart got your back. And this week, Joey, it's HR Brew. We've got a couple of friends over there.
Yeah.
They sent out a really cool email that touched on why some experts say state interviews are a good HR practice. Now, we know because this is the space that we live and work in every day. But, if you're perhaps a new people leader, new business owner, or maybe you've just been doing other things, you may not have heard of state interviews. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about them today.
Yes. And let's go ahead and I'll define stay interviews for those who may not know. And just so we have a shared understanding, it's the interview you give someone about what makes them stay. So it's kind of like if it were in the customer service world, it'd be like a customer satisfaction survey. It's the customer satisfaction survey of your employees. So you're asking questions like, why do you work here? What could we improve? If a competitor opened up across the street, what would compel you to want to apply? And it's a way to get intel from your team members about what they love, what they're just kind of meh about, and then what they really wish you could change. And so state interviews are awesome. I think they're a great retention strategy and recruiting strategy because you understand what keeps your team members motivated to be at your job. And that's a state interview. So Summer, did I miss anything? Anything you want to share on top of that that definition?
I think it's great to build that foundation, just kind of understand, first of all, like, what the heck are we talking about? And so I'll break it into a question for reflection, which is, if one of your top team members was considering leaving your company, do you think they'd tell you? And I'd say if you're unsure or the answer is no, then you might want to consider conducting state interviews because there is so much attention around exit interviews. But if you're having an exit interview, it's far too late. So the idea behind that state interview is to really focus on employee retention. And in a survey that was done by the payroll processor Paycheck, they determined that only 27% of HR leaders actually use them. And so in my mind, Joey, I'm thinking, well, that means if I'm sitting with 3 of our top competitors and I'm doing them, then I have a competitive advantage because approximately 75% of other companies aren't doing them. And they really should. They really should.
Yeah. And we place so much emphasis on exit interviews, but stay interviews are incredibly important because when you ask someone what they change about the organization as they're walking out of the door, they don't have a vested interest in making things better. So they may not even care to tell you or be honest but stay interviews help you identify with people who are vested and still employed what you should work on.
For sure, and there's a couple of ways that you can implement stay interviews. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, "Gosh, there's no way I could get to, like, all of my team," like, if it's a larger team, I mean, certainly gathering everybody's feedback is important, but organizations that I've worked with before with state interviews, in some cases take an approach of state interviews at a certain level of their organization. Like maybe it's a level that's most critical for if there's departures, would have the greatest negative impact on the organization as a whole. And, it doesn't mean that not everybody's role is important. It just means that if you have to pick and choose, that's a place to start. And a company that I worked at years ago used to do this for district managers and managers of restaurants because certainly the amount of time invested in training and replacing those roles was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And so at any point in time where somebody was identified as what we would call at risk, that meant that we had to run some interference, right? If they were at risk of leaving the organization, we needed to probe and understand what is making them at risk for leaving. And is there anything we can do
Mhm.
to, identify the root cause of their thoughts, their consideration, and to get them to a point to where they're no longer considered at risk.
Yeah, that's incredibly key that you had those mechanisms in place and you're able to do that. And it's super important that we do that on the employee side because as managers or executives or even folks in sales, right? We get it and it makes sense on the customer side, right? There are flags, there are metrics, there are warnings, there are triggers that people that we sell to might say that get us to think, oh, wow, I don't think this person's going to renew or I don't think this person's happy. So we get it on the customer side, but for there to only be 27% of HR leaders using stay interviews as a retention strategy, that leads me to believe that there's a disconnect between understanding the value of retaining a customer and understanding the value of retaining an employee, or a company might not care enough about retaining employees. And so why ask? Why bother if you're just not going to do anything with the information?
Gosh, I feel like we've said that before, Joey, in regards to exit interviews on a prior episode, but it's completely true. It's like if you have zero intention of actually doing anything meaningful with the information, then you're actually better off not even asking because you will lose trust. And I think about when it comes to stay interviews, how valuable they can be. I mean, not only for team members who are at risk, but let's just say that you have somebody that's not necessarily at risk today, but they're kind of trending in that direction. I think being able to identify what their employee experience is and what things could improve their likelihood to stay. It doesn't mean that you can or will, but I think just creating that space to have the conversations to let them know that they're heard and that their thoughts and opinions matter,
Yep.
I do think it goes a long way. And, if you can drive some change as a result, that's the ideal outcome. But, just even letting their voice be heard says a lot about the organization and how much they care about their team. And let's face it, team members want to be cared about. They want to work somewhere where they know that, they're more than just a worker. We've talked about that time and time again. And so, I think there's a direct correlation, Joey, between turnover, between employee satisfaction, between employee engagement. And if we can just solve maybe even a fraction of these through having stay interviews, I think it's a big win based on the numbers. So there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, yeah, and the article points to, a gentleman, his name is Trevor Bogan, who really echoes that thought of treating employees as valuable that you mentioned. He says, you want to convince that person to stay within the organization because you see them as a valued asset to the organization. And, not to flip things on its head here, I don't think we need to change the brand of human resources to human assets because that probably just feels a little more weird. But really and truly, when you value something, you want to make sure that you are doing what you can to show that a person is valued, just like you said. So I think it's incredibly important to look at your team members as assets. And so you should do what you do with assets. You value them, you assess, where things are going, and you're accountable to your performance against what the assets are telling you. So yeah, I think Trevor is onto something. See that you see your team members as valued assets and take the conversation from there.
Yes, and if what we've shared isn't enough already to convince you that state interviews is a good investment, a good use of your time, I mean, really think through if you're conducting exit interviews, what some of the reasons that team members are citing that they're leaving, and really look at this as a proactive approach to try to reduce or eliminate those reasons from potentially even becoming factors to begin with. And I think even through investing in all of this time, you're going to slightly make steps of improvements towards like overall improving your culture, right? Because you're opening up those lines of communication, you're sending even stronger messages to your team about how much they are valued. And those as a whole start to drive employee engagement and employee satisfaction. We know from working with all of the companies that we do that it's those small changes that collectively add up to bigger change. And that's how, if you're a small organization, you're going to be that one out of four that we discussed previously is doing the right thing and is going to give you definitely an advantage.
Summer, sometimes I feel like a broken record sometimes with saying the same things over and over, just in different angles and different topics. But what I realized, and I had a conversation with a client today, it's a newer client, and I was saying something that is very familiar to us, but they were very curious about that thing because it was new to them. And so I love having conversations like we're having here on the pod and getting new listeners in, new members of our community in, because what to us seems, you know, common, right? Do this day interview. It does its results. For someone who's tuning in, it's truly going to be a game changer. And so I would implore you, if you're listening to this conversation, if you're watching it, stop what you're doing, press pause, and jot down 3 questions that you would ask on a state interview. And if you don't think that you're gonna transform your business, if you aren't convinced that it's a big deal, just in your next meeting with a team member, ask them those 3 questions and tell me if you gain some valuable insight about how you're operating your business that moves the needle.
Mhm.
I'm sure you will. And so I love just being able to help people with their approach and strategy. Even if we're saying same things over and over. But for a new listener or someone who just needs that convincing, that's why we show up with consistency and are consistent in our message.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared that, Joey, because as I was thinking about this topic, I thought, well, I know we've covered this topic in a slightly different form before, but at the end of the day, I also feel like the overarching problems that we solve like could probably be tied back to maybe like 20 or so larger topics that are all quite similar, right? But I think it is valuable to share you know, these strategies for companies who maybe it wasn't on their radar before, but something's changed. And so, now it's top of mind. It's kind of the idea like if you're in the market to shop for a new car and you've got your eyes on a certain car, then suddenly everywhere you go, you see them, but it's because you've perked that awareness in your mind. And I think that's really the purpose of revisiting these topics on, you know, a decent frequency is really important. And like, also, let's also face it, that company culture and needs change too. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, gosh, I'd love to have some help in trying to figure out how to be that 1 in 4 company who is doing state interviews, but I'm not sure how to do it myself, then please reach out to us here at Jumpstart. You can connect with us for a free consultation by visiting jumpstart-hr.com, or you can send us an email, hello@jumpstart-hr.com, and we'd love to chat with you and see how we could help. But Joey, was there anything you wanted to add before we wrap up this episode?
No, I think we've said it all. I think we said it all, and I challenge our community to go get those interviews done and report back to us how they had an impact on the way you operate your business. So, I mean, without further ado, we can go ahead into consultants corner.
All right, all right. So, here's a really fun topic that we wanted to bring to you, and it's uh, deriving from a conversation that we've had with one of our clients in the recent months. And they ultimately came to us and said, "Hey, we're a U.S.-based company, but we also employ team members who work remotely from an international location." And understandably, we've run into a couple of major differences in terms of working together that come back to a cultural difference between the two countries. And gosh, how do we even start to address this?
Yeah. And I think what really made it clear to me that no matter where you work, you've got international colleagues, even if they're not on the payroll, is when the Russia-Ukraine crises started, and just understanding and seeing all of the tools that we use that have, whether it be Ukrainian colleagues there or colleagues in Russia. And so, not to belabor the setup for this, but just to say that the idea of working with someone internationally, whether it's on your team or working with a vendor or whatever the case may be, we should all have some level of cross-cultural sensitivity, cross-cultural awareness, cross-cultural empathy, because more and more the world is becoming small, and you are interfacing with people in places that you may never travel to. So I think it's pretty cool. But I did appreciate that we've got this on our docket for today, because yeah, even we have members who are international. So I'm looking to learn from this too. So what are some of the things people should pay attention to when there are international colleagues in the mix?
Well, I feel like this could be a whole hour episode in itself, but we'll try to cover the highlights in a short period of time. I think for me, the number one is to encourage open communication, because that's for me like the starting point for all of the other things that companies can, should, or could be doing, right? But if you don't have that open communication with your team members, it's really difficult to say, conduct cultural sensitivity training if they're not receptive to it. And so encouraging that open communication, we're just, letting your team know that this is a safe space to provide feedback, that we encourage you to share it, that we want to hear it, and to know that you can come to us and we have an open ear. Beyond that open communication, Joey touched on it, it's promoting cultural awareness. It's, providing the training to educate team members about the different cultures, specifically if they are individuals that they're going to be working with and helping them understand different customs, maybe even different communication styles. And again, comes back to communication, encouraging those open discussions about cultural differences to foster understanding. So, number one, encourage open communication. Number two, I would say promote cultural awareness. But there's many, many more things that companies could do, and I bet you have a couple ideas too.
Yeah, whether this next thing is in person, for example, if you gather at a conference or you gather for retreats or you have people coming in, or if it's virtual, so creating virtual spaces like your Slack, your Teams, your Hangouts, all those things. Think about inclusivity, and understand how you can maybe even offer language support for employees who may not be fluent in English. What can you do to provide translation services so that your employees are grasping and understanding the concepts that you are talking about? Summer, I'll never forget it. It was my first time speaking internationally, and I was in Sofia, Bulgaria, which there are many languages spoken there, and it was just cool to see how I, as an English-speaking American, could go to Europe and address an audience that doesn't speak my language, but still understood the business case for what I was talking to them about. And they had headsets on. You could choose your channel, right? So there was English, there were other different languages that you could get your translations in, and that goes a long way to making sure that your employees are feel included. Um, because even though someone may have a grasp of the English language, it may not be their primary language. It may not be a language that they have a level of mastery in. So thinking about how you can include one another through signage that is in different languages, translated to different languages, um, translation services through spoken word, and just thinking of those things can go a long way. Another thing too to think about would be the idea of you know cross cultural collaboration. Thinking about if you're one team, you've got one vision for success that you're chasing. That one vision for success may look different in the EMEA region than it does in the Latin America region. It's different than the US region because cultural norms are different, expectations are different, economics may be different. And so, if you want to reach different customers, you want to understand how do we do it in a way that is culturally aware and culturally intelligent for the place that we're at. Um, One thing I do is that I have great pleasure in is I partner with a company called Estriva to do some of their masterclass sessions, and I get to interview HR colleagues from all across the globe. And one thing that's pretty cool is we're all facing the same challenges. So I'm asking questions that someone in India, someone in Europe, someone in Latin America, someone in US, they've all got a response to, but they have a different context to where they live. And so think about just collaborating on those goals that you're trying to reach if you have customers and employees in different regions.
I love that. And I think there's so much more to cover in this, but unfortunately, Joey, our show is
Yep.
at time. So
Yep.
maybe we can wrap this up with you sharing how can our listeners get in touch with us if they'd like more information or support with this in their organization.
Reach out to us at jumpstart-hr.com. You can schedule free 15-minute calls and learn how we can serve your organization, or visit us at jumpstart-hr.com/shop so that you can point, click, and buy some of our services such as employee handbook services, prepaid consulting hours, and monthly subscription support. Summer, as always, thanks for a great show. We talked about a lot of fun things and can't wait to do it again next week. So take care.
Awesome. Thanks, Joey. And thanks, everyone, for coming to our show.